World Geography, South Asia, Green Revolution. Here are the learning objectives. 1. What decisions were made in India to make sure that an incident like the Bengal famine never occurred again? 2. How did the Green Revolution lead to a massive increase in crop production in India and Pakistan? 3. How does dwarfing increase the yield of wheat? 4. Why do some argue that the Green Revolution is unsustainable? Indian agriculture. Subsistence and commercial. 2/3 of India's population, they rely upon rural employment to make their living. Most of them are engaged in subsistence agriculture. A few others are in logging. About 55% of South Asia's land is utilized for agriculture. However, 60% of India's farmers, they have less than 2.4 acres of land. This is really not enough land to support your family. Some of the wealthier landowners, they control much larger farming areas, and they engage in commercial agriculture. Double cropping and seed genetics. Famine. The monsoon rains in India, they're unreliable. Some years they come, some years they don't arrive at all. In the past, if they didn't arrive, there would be a devastating famine somewhere in India. A famine is a severe shortage of food that results in hunger, starvation, and death. An estimated 4 million people in eastern India, they died during the Bengal famine in 1943. Distribution. At the time, people thought that the Bengal famine, that it happened because India's farmers, they just weren't producing enough food to feed everyone. However, this was a kind of a simplistic explanation. The root of the problem was one of distribution or logistics. There were surplus supplies of food elsewhere in India. There was extra food. But due to the economic mismanagement on the part of the British government, that food didn't reach the people who needed it, the hungry people. After independence in 1947, the new Indian government, they were really concerned with what they called food security. And this was ensuring that sufficient food production and distribution, that was in place to feed the nation's people. This was their top priority. Green Revolution. The Green Revolution, this term refers to the intense governmental focus on food production in India, not back in 1947, but from 1967 to 1978. In the past, the country had focused on expanding the amount of land under cultivation, so creating more farms. But the Green Revolution was focused on bringing in improved farming techniques into India and increasing the yield on each acre of land. The parts of the Green Revolution. There were 3 basic parts to this Green Revolution. First, the traditional part, where they did expand farming areas. They did put more land under cultivation. And they also installed an irrigation infrastructure in some areas. Irrigate the crops. The second part was to promote double cropping. That meant growing more varieties of different grains in the same piece of land. Another part of the Green Revolution was to improve seed genetics and use synthetic fertilizers and pesticides in the fields. Norman Borlaug. The man. Professor Norman Borlaug, he received his PhD in plant pathology and genetics. When he graduated, he went to work in Mexico. He got an agricultural research position. While he was there, he developed these semi-dwarf, high-yield, disease-resistant wheat varieties. Later on in his career, he took these high-yield varieties of wheat and he combined them with the newer, modern agricultural production. And he took these new ideas to Pakistan and India. During this time, wheat yields nearly doubled in Pakistan and India. So Borlaug, he's credited with saving over 1 billion people worldwide from starvation. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970. Dwarfing. It turns out that you can fertilize wheat. You can put nitrogen fertilizer on it. It will grow larger. It will grow taller. It will get the grains at the top of the stalk will be larger and there'll be more of it. But the problem with that technique is that the wheat stalk grows so high and so thin, and with the added weight of grain at the top, it collapses into the field and it rots. So Borlaug focused his attention on dwarfing. What he did was he bred a special kind of wheat that had a shorter and stronger stalk. And that shorter, stronger stalk, it would support a larger seed head, more grains of wheat on the top. It wouldn't collapse into the field. It was closer to the ground. And this variety of wheat was also more disease resistant. These strains of wheat, it increased the yield of wheat dramatically. Crop yields. So since the late 1950s in India, there's been a 2.5% average yearly increase in crop output. This is not because there were more lands put under cultivation. This is mostly due to an increase in yield, or how much food that a plant or a seed can produce. Income gap and the unsustainable future. Green Revolution conditions. It turns out that this Green Revolution, it could only be implemented in areas with assured supplies of water. You had to have lots of water, and you had to have the means to control it, so you had to have irrigation techniques. You had to have inputs of fertilizer. And on top of this, if you were the farmer, you had to have farm credit. You had to be credit worthy. You had to be able to go to a bank and ask for money so that you could buy the supplies for your farm. Many Indian states, they didn't meet the conditions required to implement the Green Revolution. And some of these states remained poor. So there was an income gap between those that lived in different Indian states. Unsustainable. So it turns out that the Green Revolution, it requires an immense amount of capital or money. You have to invest that in the field so you can purchase the equipment and the fertilizers. Farmers borrow this money from the bank, and they end up in this cycle of debt where they're unable to pay off the loans each year. Also, the crops require so much water that the underground water table is starting to drop dramatically, and they're afraid that desertification may occur. So you can see that some of these farming practices appear to be unsustainable. Biodiversity reduction. The other problem is that if you continue to use a limited number of plant varieties in your fields, this is going to reduce biodiversity. A reduction of biodiversity, this may lead to the fact that future crops may become more susceptible to parasites and disease. Environmental disaster. Another problem is chemical and biological toxicity. This is a real problem in green revolution areas. The synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, they're accumulating and they're collecting in the local water supply. Makes it dangerous to the people who drink the water. Also, the excessive use of fertilizers is poisoning the soil. The end. Thank you for your attention.